Hi everyone, Lior here with another Jumpstart Lightning episode. This one, super special one. I have Frank Denneman with me from VMware to talk to me about things that changed my career. Stay tuned. Hi everyone, Lior here with another Jumpstart Lightning episode. Like I mentioned, today, super special one. I have Frank with me. Frank, how you doing?
Good, doing well. How about yourself?
I'm doing great. Frank, I'm excited to have you on this show. Not many people know this, but you know this this is something that years in the making. My conversation with you, and we'll share with the audience all the context here in a second here. But before we do that, Frank, who you are, what is it that you do?
So I work at VMware. My title is Chief Technologist. I work for a business unit called the CIBG, that stands for Cloud Infrastructure Business Group.
Hmm.
And we're responsible for the core platform of VMware. So the core platform consists of the hypervisor and the core storage platform, vSphere and vSAN. What I do
Hmm.
is I am a outbound person and an inbound person. So I go on stage, talk about strategies, talk about certain things. My responsibilities is machine learning and resource management. And when I'm on stage, typically I talk to customers afterwards and I take that feedback and I bring that back to engineering. So I act as a bridge between the customer side. I translate customer talk to engineering talk
Yeah.
and I translate engineering talk to customer talk.
And Frank, not many know this, but you're also an artist, which is what we're gonna which is what we're gonna talk about today. So Frank, to set the stage here, let's give the Jumpstart viewers some context here. Okay, I'll take you down into memory lane. All right,
Okay.
I joined Microsoft 7 years ago, and I joined actually from VMware. I had a short amount of time in a different company, but generally speaking, I joined from VMware, and I've been part of the VMware community since I remember. I've been in this business for 20 years now. Since I remember, I've always been part of this, going through different phases in my career. But at one point, when I started, working for VMware, that's where, and in the community, even before joining VMware, that's where I got to know your work and Duncan. I guess your partner in crime. I'm sure you heard this, bajillion times already.
Yeah.
But that's where I started to get familiar with your work, which also influenced the way I do my work. Now, the context here, Frank, is the diagram space.
Mhm.
This is a topic that I'm super passionate about, and you have beautiful way to articulate concepts, and that influenced the way that I'm approaching diagrams. And I just wanted to have a conversation about this with you. So, what do you say? We'll have that conversation.
Yeah. And thanks for the compliment.
Yeah. So, Frank, before we talk about how you're thinking about architecture diagrams today,
Mhm.
again, a topic that I'm personally super passionate about because, and I think you and I agree on the notion of you eat with your eyes first, right? Um, but before we talk about, how you're thinking about things today, first we need to talk about the past. So, talk to me about what was the past for you and what is happening right now.
Yeah, so before I was working for VMware, I actually was a independent consultant and architect. And this diagram that I brought with me was actually the first major diagram of my first major virtual
Amazing.
infrastructure of a
The
customer.
origin.
Yeah, actually, that made me think about a lot of things. And like you said, you eat with your eyes. And I had this diagram once it was completed hanging in my office at in A0 scale, which is huge. But everybody that walked into the office, I shared the office with a couple of people,
Mhm.
they looked at the diagram and it was a conversation starter. But it also helped to make things clear in an easy way.
Mhm.
And that's the whole essence of a diagram. You have to convey a certain point. And you can only do that by really thinking about what you're trying to convey. What is the point you want to drive home? What are the essential points in a diagram that tell the story? And typically, what I see within the industry is that people throw everything in a diagram.
Yeah,
And that is something that I think shouldn't be the case. So,
yeah. You know, Frank, this notion of every diagram is telling a story is something that I'm very much can relate to. I always, when I'm talking about diagrams, and obviously you and I, we share a passion around this topic, which is why we're having this conversation. But this notion of telling a story with the diagram, and also not put too much on the plate. I
mhm.
think that looking at the diagram right now, or your first diagram, the origin, right? It makes me also think about the diagrams that I did, back then in the days when I started working on things that got to do with IT, with infrastructure and all that. I can really relate to this evolution, because today, we all have our own style and all that. So I wanted to ask you, how how did you started to do this transition to what we're seeing today from you, which I'm sure you're going to show me in a minute here.
Yeah. So what you see here is called an isometric style. So it has a particular way of view, and this looks nice. And I still think this diagram is really nice, and it
Mhm.
makes me smile when I see
I
it.
agree. I agree.
But it's horrendous to draw. Lines are difficult to draw, and you need to rely on those images that need to be provided by the vendor or by a third party.
Yeah.
Now, typically, not everything is available, so you're stuck. And so I thought, well, it limits me in my own creativity. So I at one point I went back to block diagrams, but then I started to think, okay, how can you still make a beautiful diagram that
Hmm.
drives down the point and still have it in a way that is pleasing to look at? So one of the things that I learned, and this sounds funny to most people, I started to read a book, Godel, Escher, and Bach,
Mm.
which is a book that links music, math, uh, and the drawings of a Dutch artist, Escher, together.
Okay.
And it actually, one of the key elements in that book is the Fibonacci sequence. And it actually shows that a lot of beauty in this world is based on the Fibonacci sequence. It's the um, golden
Interesting.
ratio. A lot of beautiful buildings in this world are designed based on the golden ratio. And I thought, let me try that on in my diagrams as well. And it helps to position certain things in your diagrams as well. Use white space,
Hmm.
use particular colors, use as little as elements as possible to emphasize the things as possible. And colors are really important, because
Hmm.
one of the things what you don't want to do is to make your diagram look like a circus tent, like with 600 colors,
Yeah.
and like a clown show. It doesn't really help people to look at your diagram. And so there
Yeah.
are really interesting resources on the internet. Colors, a website, Colors with two O's, by the way,
Hmm.
is a really nice resource that allows you to tell or to pick a certain color palette. Let's say you have decided that you have four different things that you want
Mm.
to highlight. And so you can say, I want to have a color palette of four colors. And it's going to give you a range of color palettes. And you can pick from
Okay.
those one. So it's
Okay.
really, really nice that a way to get you started. And then it's basically driving down like, okay, what is really necessary?
I like what you said, that you don't want your diagram to look like a clown show, and which is something that I resonate with. We all went through this journey. We all going through this journey of what is our own style, like
Mhm.
what is it that we can relate to. When I'm doing a lot of the architecture diagrams that I do, I'm trying to, one, keep it consistent, so you would also have my watermark on it, because at the end you want to have some sort of a brand when it comes to, hey, that this is the Frank Denneman method. This is something that you want to have, and obviously this is resonating and all that. But I wanted to also ask you with regards, and it's super interesting what you just said around this concept and all these. This is coming from building architecture. It goes all the way to these type of concept. This is no joke. Like when you are trying to treat an technology diagram, just call it that way, looking at
Mhm.
that from the angle of you are architecting something that maybe it's similar to how people are architecting, or at least thinking about architecture of buildings, and like you just mentioned, like these very weird and interesting concepts of connecting two worlds that not necessarily got to do with one another, but connecting them via the diagrams concept. So that's one thing. But I also wanted to ask you, like, if I'm looking at the diagram right now, talk to me about the evolution. Like, how did you started to land on the current style that you have? I really wanna understand this.
Yeah. So let me show you another one. So this is the diagram that I draw.
Yeah,
It's back in 2007. So it's 15, 16 years old.
we don't have to say how old we are. It's all good.
Showing my age here. Um, and now I'll show you another one. Um, this is a more recent one. I think
Yeah.
it's a year old, 2 years old. The thing that I'm trying to convey here is latency differences
Hmm.
between two two different CPU families
Hmm.
or brands, actually, a Xeon and an Intel Xeon and an AMD EPIC, but also um, local memory, remote memory, and
Mm.
cache. And so it's actually a very complex topic, but trying to really think about, okay, how can I do this in a manner that really shows you in an instance, in really an easy way to grasp the idea, like, okay, how can I really understand that the difference between coming from an Intel going to an AMD EPIC, how
Mm.
will that impact my performance? And I try to tell it like this, that, hey, for most companies, 95% of the on-prem data centers are run on Intel Xeons,
Hmm.
and a fair portion of customers are looking into AMD EPIC,
Hmm.
and they're asking me like, so what type of performance a hit will I see? Well, if you're going to local memory on an
Hmm.
AMD EPIC, you basically receive the same performance of remote memory of an Intel Xeon. That's basically what it says here.
Hmm. So,
That's an eye opener for most people.
you know, Frank, this eye opener thing that you just kind of close that statement. I everyone knows you as someone that is like a subject matter expert on all things CPUs, NUMA, and all that. And I do want to talk to you about all the new things, not new, but the current things that you're working on, which is like the machine learning stuff. We'll touch base on this in a second here. But what we're looking at here right now is a diagram that is designed to show, I want to say, a flow or a behavior based on a certain scenario.
Mhm.
And it's not necessarily um, a building block diagram in the sense that, hey, this is an architecture, here's this component, talks to that component. I want to ask you, how do you approach those two types of diagrams, which is one architecture diagram and
Yeah.
another one that is designed to show a flow or show a situation, either degradation in performance or something like that, like we're seeing right now? What is your way of thinking about this?
Yeah, with architecture, you're always thinking about what leans on another thing. What is the fundamental thing? What builds upon each other? right? And then you're basically thinking like a true architect. Like, what is the foundation, and what is the layer that comes after it or
Hmm.
up on it.
Yeah.
Now, with other things, then you're thinking about, okay, what is the true essence of the element? What is important? What is the key essential element of things? With this, it is time. It is latency. And so then your main element that you're trying to convey here is time. And so
Yeah.
a ruler that shows time and that allows you to
I love
uh,
it.
uh, basically compare two things is the way to show the difference. That's typically the thing. So, but to show you an architectural design, um, and this is what Duncan always refers to as the Death Star diagram when I'm presenting this. This is not a
I didn't know that Duncan calls it different, but
yeah.
that's fine.
This is something that move away from one of the key strategies that I have. And one of the key strategies that I have is a diagram should be enough without me in the room. It should tell a story without me in the room. Now, this might not be the case, right? So there are exceptions to my own rule.
Yeah.
But this is also a diagram that doesn't uh, um, really follow that fundamental thing of what builds on each other. And because this is an interesting thing,
Yeah.
this is actually a pipeline. And so I followed the flow of data
Mm.
in this diagram. Okay, it starts with ingestion of video images, and at one point, it is actually presented, or it's actually something that is an application and it's monitored by a cloud native service.
And Frank, I'm noticing something here because, and again, you and I, we talked about this stuff, but this is where we're starting to dive into some nuances, right? So first of all, I really the notion of what you said in the previous diagram around finding the anchor, which in the previous diagram that was all about the latency, the time aspect, right? And then build something that will emphasize that, or use an element like a ruler, right?
Yeah.
Super simple, right? But that really creates that mental connection between the anchor and what is it that you're using to highlight that anchor. So that's one thing. But in this diagram, if I'm looking at this from an you know artist standpoint,
Mhm.
someone that also kind of can nerd out and geek on those type of things. If I'm looking at the top circles that you have, even an element that not a lot of people are thinking about, you have an inner circle inside the circle in a different color, right, which will highlight the different stages of the pipeline,
Mhm.
basically. And that comes on top to provide, it's almost like you have a high level and a low level diagram in the same diagram.
Yes,
That's, to me, that's the impressive thing that you thought about here. And those are concepts that I really take with me when I'm looking at these type of things.
thanks. Yeah, so
Yeah.
the red circles are for the for the data team of the data science team itself, and the blue ones are for the data scientists that are actually working on the model itself. For example,
Yeah.
it's a split of responsibilities, and the green ones are the MLOps teams. And so that's the split, and this is a part of a larger story, but and that's what I also try to do: sequence diagrams and continue telling a story and
Yeah.
keep on reusing the same thing because it's a story. And this is also very important. And you also mentioned it about your own watermark. Try to be consistent
Yeah.
with styles. And this is something what you see with a lot of PowerPoint presentation. You see 15 different fonts. You see
Yeah.
15 different ways of depicting a server or a service. or whatever. Stop
Yeah.
doing that.
Attention to
Um,
details.
yeah, well, try to make it consistent. And it doesn't have to be pretty at first, but the moment you start to make it consistent, it
Yeah.
becomes easier to the eye. And here's the thing, especially when you present, either people look or they listen. Typically, most people cannot do both.
Yeah.
And the moment you start to make it really uneasy for people, they are rattled and they are having a hard time paying attention, or they tune out.
Yeah.
And by making a consistent deck and making a consistent way of presenting things, it's easier for them, and they start to pay attention longer, and they listen more to you.
It's this is a very important thing here, Frank, that you're bringing up, because people retention, right? And that's not me saying that, those are studies, right? Shows that you have 4 to 8 seconds to grab someone's attention immediately, either in a presentation or a video. 4 to 8 seconds. That's like nothing. And the best example is that when you go on YouTube and you see all those thumbnails, right? It's the thumbnail that's supposed to catch your eye and make you click. And sometimes you have these previews of those videos that will make you click. And I'm thinking about this the same as I'm thinking about the diagram. If you've seen an eye candy, you will be like, okay, let me tune in into this, right? Maybe later it will be more, a bit too complex for me, and maybe some people will zone out and fade. But still, it's the hook that is really important when you are looking at these type of things. And Frank, talking about science for a second, right? You're currently in the space of machine learning. How does that how does that impact the way you're thinking about this type of stuff? How does, like, talk to me about this from a day-to-day basis?
For me, it's every day is learning, and that means every day I'm trying to, what I learn, I try to draw it out, and
Yeah.
I'm making diagrams every single day, and that helps me to understand the problem at hand, because I'm drilling down to the essence. And I think that is key. That helps me learn. The moment you start to teach yourself, or basically get it to a certain point where you can where you can create a diagram for yourself that helps you nail the point, you know the
Yeah.
content. Yeah.
I'm loving it, Frank. I wanna wrap up this episode. I love that you take me to school with this. It's really eye opening to me when I'm thinking about, when we're creating diagrams. You stay in your own universe, you stay in your own bubble, and you just kind of put it out there and see what sticks. When you started to get perspective from other people that are really into it, it's very interesting. I want to ask you a final question, Frank, before I'm wrapping up this before we're wrapping up this episode. How do you feel? Like, what how does it make you feel when you see diagrams that makes your eye burn? Like, how like, what is the process in your head? Because I have it, and I'm like, I see at least tens of diagrams a day, and I'm like, all the things that you talked about, the consistencies, all that. How do you feel about
Such a shame.
that?
No, people should know better. But the thing is, um, I hope people will pay attention a little bit more, and I hope this episode will inspire people to create more beautiful diagrams. It really helps other people to pay attention to your story.
Pay attention to details, understand the story, and know your anchor points. That's really what I'm taking out of this. Frank, thank you so much for having this conversation with me. Like I mentioned, this was, for me at least, years in the making. There's not a lot of people in the industry that I'm thinking about them when I am thinking about my career. You're one of them, so I appreciate everything that you do and how you impacted my career. So really want to thank you. Thank you. And for the Jumpstart audience, I really hope you like this episode. I definitely, enjoyed this episode. Make sure to like, subscribe, let us know in the comments. share with us your architecture diagrams. Tell us what you think. What are the things that matters to you when you're architecting a diagram or drawing a diagram, and how much you learn out of this. Frank, just to wrap things up, thank you so much, my friend, for joining me.
Honored to be here. Thanks.
Thank you. We'll see you next time.